and welcome to the Legal Edition. I'm your host, Attorney Mary Kay Loyan. Our show topic today is the new food order, how glyphosate, herbicides, and GMOs are shaping our future, and what the food industry doesn't want you to know. Our guest is Dr. Stephanie Seneff. She is a senior research scientist at MIT Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. She holds several degrees from MIT, including biophysics, electrical engineering, and computer science. Let's welcome Dr. Seneff. Thank you for being here.
I'm delighted. Thank you for having me.
Now, our topic today is the new foods that are becoming available in the United States, especially glyphosate-used products on GMOs.
Mm-hmm.
Can you first start by telling the audience what is a GMO?
Well, a GMO is an organism that's been modified by inserting a gene from some other organism, going clear across phyla. So for example, they take bacterial genes and they insert them into plants. And these genes give the plant beneficial advantage. Things like the gene can render it resistant to glyphosate. That's a really big one that they do. Another gene that they insert from a microbe produces a toxin that kills insects. So that you don't have to apply a chemical to kill the insect. You just have the plant make a chemical all by itself. It makes something that's toxic to the insects. That's the Bt corn. So those are two very primary GMO products that have been produced, and they have those introduced in many of the core crops, like corn and soy, canola, which is canola oil, and sugar beets, and tobacco, and cotton. Those are the principal ones, alfalfa as well. So these are like the crops that they grow huge amounts of in really large farms, and they can use very little human resource. So this is why we have only 3% of our nation's employees are farmers today, because we can get by with having very massive farms produced by where you grow huge amounts of soy, and you hardly even have to go into the field. You just spray from the airplane. You can spray the glyphosate and kill all the weeds. And you're spraying it all over the plant as well. And so the plant is taking it up and is getting into the food chain. Glyphosate, by the way, is the active ingredient in the weed killer Roundup. And Roundup has been used more and more over time to kill weeds in the U.S. A dramatic rise in Roundup usage over the past 15 years in step with the adoption of these GMO plants. So they're connected. That the more they use the GMO plants, the more Roundup they use. And partly that's because they get Roundup-ready weeds coming along with Roundup-ready plants. So weeds become resistant, and they have to use more and more. And so we're getting more and more of the chemical into our food, only nobody's looking to see if that's true or not. So it's kind of a crapshoot. We don't know,
Isn't it also growing superweeds as well? Because wouldn't they become resistant?
Well, that's what's happening. In fact, they've gotten desperate. In some cases, they've had to pull the weeds by hand because the weeds have gotten so resistant that no amount of glyphosate will kill them. So now, of course, they're introducing new GMOs that will have multiple resistance to glyphosate plus some other chemical like atrazine or 2,4-D, which are considered to be much more toxic than Roundup. And now they're introducing these into our crops as well. So this is a chemical escalation that is going to, in the end, fail. It's going to ruin the soil, it's going to ruin our health, and it's going to completely destroy the concept of sustainable agriculture. So I think we have to do something drastically different, and we have to do it soon, really to save ourselves from.
Now, many countries, I understand, do not accept some of these products.
That's right. Yes, there's more and more countries that are waking up and realizing that these products are not healthy. And, China's has rules that have been violated, and then they discover the violation, they ship back all the crop, because there's some engineered gene that they were not allowing, but the U.S. tried to sell them the product anyway. Things like that are happening. Mm-hmm. China's also getting more and more suspicious about whether the GMO concept is good or not, and they're really backing off. Like they had a big development of rice. They were trying to develop a GMO rice, and they've backed off. They've just decided not to continue that because they're worried, I think, about potential consequences.
Mm-hmm. Now, from what I understand, glyphosate is also used not only as a weed killer, but it's also used as in what's called crop desiccation.
That's right, crop killer, you could say.
Yeah, could you elaborate on what that is?
I could, and I was really surprised. I only learned that fairly recently, within the last year or two, that they are increasingly adopting this practice of spraying the crop with Roundup right before the harvest, just 3 or 4 days before they harvest the seed. And this is in major crops like wheat and barley, and sugar cane, and so sugar beets are a Roundup Ready crop, and sugar cane is being sprayed right before the harvest. So this is, and of course you have corn, which produces high fructose corn syrup. So all of those sugars are going to be, I suspect, containing glyphosate. And this could be one of the reasons why sugar has become such a health issue. People are aware that sugar is bad for you. I don't know to what extent it's the sugar versus the poisons that are in it,
And don't all these things create not only weed issues, but shown kidney and liver toxicity in
right.
Lab studies?
Well, it's been amazing,
animals?
Actually. Yeah, there's the lab study that Seralini did. Seralini et al. In France did an amazing study where they looked at rats over their entire lifespan. They fed them GMO Roundup Ready corn and soy, and they compared them to other rats that were fed an organic equivalent diet. And after 3 months, they didn't notice much difference. And 3 months is the limit that the industry uses in the studies that they conduct.
Why 3 months?
I mean, I think that the industry uses 3 months because you don't see the difference. It takes time before the poison sets in. And Seralini started to see problems at 4 months.
I see.
But all the industry studies only go for 3 months. So that's how they can claim that it's safe.
And what did Seralini find?
He found liver damage, kidney damage, mammary tumors, huge mammary tumors in the female rats, and shortened lifespan.
That's unbelievable.
I think so. I mean, when I read that article, I was already suspecting glyphosate as being linked to autism. And after reading that article, I was much more persuaded that I was on the right track with that.
And I think you brought some photos to show also on some of these issues,
yes.
including the autism.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about autism, too. What have you found with regard to that?
Well, the amazing thing that I've found is the correlation between autism and Roundup usage on corn and soy. So luckily the U.S. government has data that they provide on the web, so anybody can go download these data that will show the rise in Roundup usage over time on the corn and soy crops. And then
excuse me, when did that begin?
Well, so they introduced the Roundup Ready concept in the late 1990s. So that's only been about 15, 20 years. 15 years. Before that, of course, they were still using Roundup, but they were using a lot less. And so I do have this plot right here. Autism prevalence in the U.S. So this is the six-year-olds, first graders, U.S. school system, and they're diagnosed with autism, which puts them on a special program. So this is a U.S. government program, and that's on the web, and you can plot that. And then if you also plot the use of Roundup integrated over the previous 4 years, so that's looking at sort of an estimate of the child's exposure over the from the age of 2 to the age of 6, and you get an absolutely perfect match, 0.997 Pearson correlation coefficient. I find that stunning.
It is.
And it's amazing to me that they're willing to take much, much weaker correlations between cholesterol and heart disease and say, let's all take a statin drug. It's much, much weaker correlations. This one, they say, oh, well, correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation. If you see correlations like this, the first thing you're going to do is look for causation if you've got any sense at all. And that's what I did.
And that's what any researcher would do.
Any researcher should do that. It would be stupid not to,
Well, it would
and
be
in
sort
fact,
of
when you look, you
malpractice.
find out that causation is very clear. I mean, it's incredible because once you see what glyphosate does in the experiments that have been conducted and what autism is, it's very easy to connect the dots across the board.
Now, they've done studies actually on, was it a fetal pig that they did the study on, the glyphosate?
Yes.
Or was it the glyphosate or was it the GMO?
Well, they've done lots of things, and one that's very interesting is fetal pigs that were deformed. They found glyphosate in the tissues, including in the brain and in the muscle. So you're getting, chickens as well, they found glyphosate in the muscle. So if you're eating chicken, you're eating glyphosate because the chicken's being fed very high doses. They have much higher limits, residue limits allowed in the animal feed compared to the ones they allow in the human feed. But the animal is going to bioaccumulate it in its own muscles, and then you're going to eat that. So you're not safe from glyphosate if you choose to eat only, if you say, well, I just won't eat plants, or I just won't eat the foods that
Right. So even vegetarians, they can't get away from it. It sounds like vegetarians
would have a really hard time, other than to go organic, which is what we've done. My husband and I buy only 100% organic when we go to the grocery store. We're quite strict about it, and if we can't find it organic, we say, well, we'll do without that. And I've had to give up corn on the cob because that's just hopeless to find. They just, it's all contaminated.
It just amazes me. Now, doesn't the FDA regulate any of this?
The amazing thing is that Monsanto did a very good job of convincing the FDA many years ago that glyphosate is a wonderful, wonderful product because it's harmless to humans. And they have maintained that policy. Monsanto has assured us that it is absolutely harmless to humans. And then they claim that they have plenty of evidence to support this, but when you look at the evidence, they don't. And it's very, I mean, Nancy Swanson, we've talked before in private, you and I, about Nancy Swanson and her plots, and she has an amazing set of plots showing all these correlations between Roundup and various diseases, human diseases, and all of them make sense to me. I'm taking each one in turn and studying why would that one be connected. It's allowing me to figure out a lot about biology. I mean, that's one thing useful. Glyphosate becomes a probe into illness to help you understand what's causing those illnesses.
It certainly seems so to me. Now, you also said there was a photo that you had that you were going to show the audience with regards to the inflammation.
Yes, and so this was another experiment. I mentioned the fetal pigs that were damaged. They were defective, and they had the glyphosate in their urine, and they tested it in their urine and in their tissues. And this is a picture of the stomachs of pigs that were fed. They did a controlled experiment where they fed one group of pigs organic, and they fed the other group these GMO Roundup Ready crops. So they don't know exactly what's causing the stomach inflammation, but you can see that it's a dramatic, dramatic difference between the stomach of the organic feed.
It's like night and
pigs.
day.
Yes.
I mean, it's just totally bright red versus, you know, basically a muted tone of normalcy.
Right, exactly. And so that makes it clear something's going on with the digestive system. And interestingly enough, we have all kinds of digestive diseases that are going up in incidence, including in children. We have, you know, an epidemic of inflammatory bowel disease and even Crohn's disease and colitis and celiac disease. So celiac is very interesting, and that's one that I studied in depth. And Anthony Samsel and I have written 2 papers. We're actually working on a 3rd one now. Our 2nd paper was on celiac disease.
And what did you find?
Amazing. I mean, we just found one thing after the other that all connected celiac disease to glyphosate. It's a long paper and with a lot of references, and celiac disease turns out to have a complex, you know, profile. There's lots and lots of things that are affected. For example, celiac patients tend to have a much higher risk of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma has also been directly linked to glyphosate. And they have issues with infertility, and they have issues with increased risk to anemia. There's just a huge number of different things that celiac patients have that glyphosate has been shown to cause in animal models. So it all links up very beautifully. You could read the paper to see that that's the case.
I certainly will.
And then we have the plot as well to support that, which is the glyphosate usage on wheat. And the wheat is not GMO, of course. It's not Roundup Ready. They spray it on the wheat to kill it, to desiccate it. That makes it much more convenient to clear the crop and get ready for next year's crop.
So you're telling me that even conventionally grown crops of wheat that are not GMO.
There is a GMO wheat, but no one is willing to adopt it. Nobody wants it. The farmers don't want it.
So, but even so, they're using this glyphosate as a desiccant. Why really do they need this?
Well, you know, it used to be they would burn. It's the same thing with sugarcane. They would burn the crop. They just wanted to clear the residue to get ready for planting next year. And then they needed to. Ordinarily, they would then follow that with application of pesticides, of herbicides. Now they can just do the herbicide treatment at the same time. So they're kind of getting a head start on next year's weeds.
Well, is this while the crop is still there?
Yeah, right before the harvest. All the food is still ready. It's still waiting to be harvested.
But it seems contradictory. Why wouldn't they harvest it and then desiccate whatever's
I agree with you. This would be the logical thing to do. Harvest first and then desiccate. It seems like a no-brainer. Probably it's more efficient to do it all at once. I mean, you could ask them. I actually don't know. I mean, it seems so obvious. I mean, their mentality is, oh, this stuff is harmless. So once you think it's harmless, you think, well, it doesn't matter. So what if it gets into the food? We don't care. And, you know, it's a very, very dangerous attitude. And, of course, people go down to the hardware store, buy the Roundup, put it on the weeds in their yard, and they probably apply it, many of them, carelessly. You know, people often don't, they have the label might tell you about how to be careful. And lots of times people think, oh, I bought it at the hardware store open. No, it didn't require any restrictions. This stuff is, I can just be very casual dealing with this stuff. And they can get sick just from being exposed while they're applying it to the weeds in their yard, or their children running around in the yard after they've applied it. I find this very disturbing.
The aeration of it, that in itself is toxic, you're saying.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, people have gotten, I've gotten email from people who got accidentally exposed. They were walking the dog and the sprayer came by and they got, I have one story about the woman and the dog, and both of them had huge health issues after they got exposed to glyphosate.
Could they ever get better, or is this something?
She's still struggling to get better.
Really?
Yeah. And I think the dog died, so.
Well, that's not a good story.
No, the stuff is much more toxic than they realize. These sugarcane fields, so there's the sugarcane fields in Sri Lanka and other parts of Central America and in India, and they're spraying the sugarcane with glyphosate right before the harvest. A relatively new practice, by the way. It's only been really in the last 5-10 years that this has gotten popular. And the sugarcane workers are all dying of kidney failure. So there's a huge epidemic of kidney failure among young men working in the sugarcane fields. And this has been a big puzzle. And finally a paper came out from Sri Lanka. I loved this paper because it talked about arsenic and glyphosate working synergistically to kill the kidney. And this was the reason why Sri Lanka decided to ban glyphosate usage on crops after this came out, after they figured out that the glyphosate was the reason.
Well, so we now know that from your studies and from your research from experts from around the globe, it sounds like,
yes,
that there is a problem, and it's not indicative of something here in the United States, but
it's pervasive and it's growing around the world. It's we're headquarters. First of all, Monsanto is headquartered in Missouri in the U.S., and we consume 25% of the world's glyphosate market. So we're the worst hit, and I think that's why we have the highest healthcare costs. This country has astronomical healthcare costs. We have very cheap food, by the way. Our food is the cheapest among all the industrialized countries, but our healthcare costs are by far the most expensive. I think it's directly linked.
So we're paying one way or the other.
Yeah, and we're paying with our health, you know.
In
You'd
our
much
lives.
rather be healthy and our lives, right.
It just seems counterintuitive. So we need to
It doesn't make any sense what we're doing.
We need the government to get on board with this.
We do. We absolutely do.
You know, so we've seen so far that autism spectrum is linked. We've seen that gluten intolerance is linked, because it seems like there's been an epidemic of gluten intolerance.
All of a sudden you have these gluten-free sections in all the grocery stores.
Exactly.
10 years ago you didn't.
No, you did not.
And all of a sudden everyone's saying, oh, wheat's bad for you. You know, it's not the wheat. It's the toxic chemicals that are in the wheat.
And then you have the dysbiosis in the intestinal tract, which I wouldn't be surprised if they did some studies. They could find that people have developing colorectal cancer because of this.
I agree.
I wouldn't be surprised, but again, that's for another day and another researcher.
Right.
And you said there's some correlation between that and diabetes.
There's very strong correlations between glyphosate usage on corn and soy, and as I said, a whole bunch of diseases. Some of them are diabetes, even high blood cholesterol,
really,
high blood pressure. And so all those kind of cardiovascular diseases. And then you have the autism, you have Alzheimer's disease or dementia, you have Parkinson's disease. And so these are all neurological diseases. And then you have all these gut diseases. You have the inflammatory bowel disease. And then you have cancers. You have specifically pancreatic cancer, thyroid cancer, and then of course you have the non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Wow. Well, I know...
And the kidney failure, of course, and also liver disease.
Well, I know that I had read recently, I believe it was in The Nation, that there are now 26 countries at last count that have a total or partial ban on GMOs, and significant restrictions by 60 countries. And I know the Center for Food Safety says that 64 countries require the labeling on GE foods, which gets me to my next topic, the state of Vermont. The state of Vermont is actually, I applaud the state of Vermont. They had the courage to do
so thrilled.
A food labeling law.
It's terrific. Without restrictions.
Without restrictions, without the trigger clauses. Here in New England, several states are actually
waiting
passing.
for Massachusetts to do it.
Connecticut was the first in the nation to actually pass this legislation, but it has a trigger clause looking for other contiguous states to also pass similar laws for it to take effect, and is Maine as well.
Yeah.
But Vermont did a standalone law.
They're heroes. I really am so happy that they did that.
As soon as that law passed, It passed in June of 2014. It was signed by the governor of Vermont. 1 month later, they're being sued by the Grocery Manufacturers Association, the Snack Food Manufacturers Association, the Dairy Association, and so on, and big business and big biotech pharma are some of the members of these organizations. So the governor is actually being sued in his official capacity, and so isn't the Attorney General of Vermont and all the others in line there. Like I said, I applaud Vermont for going and doing what so many of our states should do. What do you have to say with regards to the labeling law, which I think does not include glyphosate?
No one's looking at glyphosate. Yeah. And I think, in fact, what we should do is forget about GMOs and go straight for glyphosate, because it's a much more serious problem, in my opinion. And just the GMO labeling is not enough. I'm not content to buy something that's just no GMOs. It has to be organic, or I won't buy it. Because the glyphosate is the poison, I think. The GMOs are not harmless, and I don't exactly understand how bad they are, because they're very difficult to understand. The glyphosate is much clearer, because it is a poison, and you know exactly what it's disrupting physiologically, and you can predict what that's going to cause, and it matches everything that's happening. So it's a slam dunk, in my opinion.
Now, the photo that you showed with the pig and the inflammation, was that animal fed the GMO and the glyphosate?
Well, they were fed the GMO Roundup Ready crops. No one even measured to see if there was Roundup in them or not. I believe. Now, I might be wrong. It might be they actually detected Roundup in the crop. I'd have to go back and refresh my memory on the. I mean, I'm pretty much certain that it did have Roundup, because I know there are limits. When you look at the residue limits, and I've looked at them for the various, the food, the U.S. has a bunch of residue limits, and they have like 10 times as much allowed on the animal feed compared to the human. So it's very clear that they're seeing those kinds of levels. That's why they have those high limits.
Yeah, I find the information startling, but I also find it startling to know that countries such as Australia and Russia, they don't want some of these.
I love it, you know, with Putin, he's saying, you guys can have your GMOs, we don't want them. And I'm looking to a future in which we're going to have a very healthy Russian population and a very sick U.S. population. I mean, if there's a battle going on between democracy versus communism and it comes down to the food, it's just pretty stupid, really, you know? If that's what it happens, is that we fail and they succeed simply because they're eating organic food, which is possible, I think.
Now, what is the story with Ukraine? And that is the breadbasket of that
I know.
area.
I mean, there's GMO, there's stuff's going on there. Monsanto's very interested in Ukraine because it has really, really good soil. And I don't know to what extent this whole issue of it's really West versus East, but it is also organic versus GMO, you know, to embrace this kind of chemical agriculture approach. And when countries do embrace it, they free up a lot of people to do other stuff. So, you know, you sort of have an agricultural country that then transitions into a technological country, I think in large part because it doesn't have to grow all those crops. It doesn't have to use all those human resources to grow the crops. Once you can free up the population to do other things because you're just killing the weeds with chemicals, you gain a lot more manpower to do other things, and allows you to develop a technological society. You know, so it's sort of interesting that, you know, you pay a huge price for technology in a sense, because the reason is that you don't have to devote all your manual efforts into farming. Farming becomes much less demanding in terms of the human, you know, employment and all that sort of thing. So we have to recognize, I think, that that option is not good, that we need to go back to expecting to have many of our people be farmers. The small farmer is what we need to be pushing. Small organic farms with sustainable agriculture where they're renewing the soil instead of destroying it. Because this glyphosate is destroying the soil, as well as destroying our gut. It's destroying the soil bacteria as well, and depleting the minerals in the soil. So the soil over time gets ruined, and then the crop becomes weaker and weaker, and it starts getting all these diseases, like all these fungus diseases. There's an epidemic in fungus diseases in the crops and in animals. Animals are going extinct because of fungus diseases, like the bat here in the Northeast.
Well, I think we're running out of time. It's been a plethora of information. And I want to thank Dr. Seneff for coming today. I want to thank her, and I want to thank her for sharing her opinions and her research on GMOs and the herbicides that go along with them. And please remember, this is for informational purposes only. It is not intended to be legal, business, or advice, professional advice. And again, we thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time for more of the Legal Edition.